And so these were a couple of the ways that they did that. The gods, the ancient gods from the ancient mystery religions, were not explanations of the way the natural world operated. They were constructed deliberately in order to provide visualization exercises for the practice. Same thing with the iconology from the ancient and early Christians. So we have the concept of the cross, we have the concept of Jesus' avatar on the cross being tormented for 3 days. Torture. I mean, if you stop and think about what the crucifixion is, crucifixion was one of the most barbaric, brutal, nasty, vicious kinds of torture. And they were, the people who did this were specifically trained in order to inflict the maximum amount of pain and suffering without killing the person. They could keep you alive for weeks if they wanted to on that cross. All they had to do was feed you a little food, give you a little water, and you would survive for weeks in constant, intense pain. They drove the spikes right through here, okay, because there's a whole bunch of nerve clusters right there. They drove the spikes through the feet down there, right through the bone, okay? And they had a little saddle here so that you didn't suffocate, because if that saddle wasn't there, you wouldn't be able to breathe and you'd suffocate. They didn't want that, so they put a little saddle there so you would not suffocate. And you would just hang out in the elements for as long as they wanted you to suffer. Intense pain and suffering. So this is the prime, fundamental symbol, icon of the Christian practice, to remind us that we are divine beings who are strapped to a cross and suffering endlessly. So that we have, again, just like the cemetery contemplations, wake up and take control of this situation. We don't have to suffer. We don't have to do any of that, because we're divine. All we have to do is remember who we are. And that's what all these practices are intended to do. To identify with the gods, so that we know that we're divine. To imitate Christ, so that we know that we're divine. To do koan meditation, so that we can remember who we are. The thinking substance that we are. Not this particular incarnation in this particular avatar at this particular time in this particular place. This is simply a role. An important role, but nonetheless it is a temporary role that we will abandon sooner or later. Okay? So, was that a good enough restatement of everything? Okay. Now, we're here taking a look at psychoanalysis and taking a look at the way that psychoanalysis interprets meditative and spiritual phenomena. And I really love psychoanalysis, and it is definitely a good science. It's on good, solid ground. But what it is describing is the avatar. It is limited to a description of the avatar, and it's a good description of the avatar. But it has no relationship to the thinking substance which we are. And it's important to recognize that and remember that, because Freud and many of the people who followed him were absolute, strict determinist, materialist atheists. There's nothing after this life. This is it. This is all you get. And you are nothing but that body. Okay? So keep that in mind as we take a look at what Freud talks about. Here's Freud in 1921. Born in 1856, died in 1939. As I pointed out, he died of throat cancer from smoking cigars. And it was very painful. He was in a lot of pain for about the last, almost 30 years of his life. We talked about the conscious and the unconscious. The ego is a bodily ego, and he recognizes that it's this. He's talking about this thing here, because everything that he talks about has to be referred back to the avatar, the body. Okay? Now we talked about the Oedipus complex, libido, eros, and thanatos. Remember that there's only two ways of the avatar to relate to other avatars, and that is either seduction or aggression, sexuality or violence. Those are the only two ways, because this particular organism is in fact, and has evolved from, an animal past in which sex and aggression were the primary instincts, and they still are.
Well, we just did we just did that exercise, love and hate. People I love, I like to seduce.
Well, you'll be both seductive and violent towards the people you love and the people you hate. Okay, yeah. So there's going to be. I mean, if you're friendly, if you're smiling, you know, if you hug them and all, that's a seduction. Okay, that's a seduction. If you're frowning and angry at them, that's an aggression. So again, these are the two poles around which the avatar is according to psychoanalysis, is instinctually revolving all the time. And so what you'll see with young children as they grow up, you'll actually see this pretty obviously. Because the boys and the girls will attempt to seduce you as their parent first. And when that is, they'll be nice to you and they'll do all these kinds of things. That's a seduction. And then when that fails, what do? Yeah, they throw a temper tantrum. So that's their aggression. Since they can't physically attack the parent, they just, you know, have this aggressive response there because they're revivifying the ancient animal kinds of behaviors that the avatar has evolved from. So it's important to keep that in mind. Seduction and aggression are the two primary forms of relationship that the avatar has available. And again, keep in mind, we are not the avatar. Those of us who follow this path recognize that and practice all of the techniques that will remind us constantly who we are and provide us actual experience of the separation of ourselves from the avatar and the extended world. So we can demonstrate this. This is not just a simple belief pattern. It was never just a simple belief pattern. This has nothing to do with faith. Okay? Faith is a later thing. That came about later. Okay? The kind of faith that we're familiar with. All right? And that was used as a control mechanism, as a political control mechanism. Okay? Remove from the teaching the core of it, which would provide you actual experiential data and the ability to separate from the avatar, and keep that under tight control. The only way you're going to get to heaven is if you do exactly what I tell you. And you have to take all of this on faith. So that is what has happened in the modern era. And it was deliberate. I mean, it was an absolute deliberate intention. And it goes back as far as we can go back too. But here, we're taking a look at the way that the avatar functions, the developmental cycles, the id, the physiological and psychological reservoir of energy and instinct. Okay, it operates on the pleasure principle. I want what I want because it makes me happy and I want it now. Ego is created from the interaction of the avatar with its environment. In other words, it has to now, interpret all the things that are happening to it in the external world. It interacts with other people. It interacts with family members. It interacts with parents, adults, teachers, policemen, judges, who knows what it interacts with. And every one of them will be behaving insanely from its perspective. Okay? Not a single one of the adults that it encounters will make a damn bit of sense to it. They're all capricious and arbitrary. They follow no rules. They don't seem to have any patterns of behavior. Sometimes my seductive behaviors work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes my temper tantrums work, sometimes they don't. Okay? The adults that I encounter are absolutely, totally irrational. Okay? And so the reality principle then becomes this model of how to interact with this completely irrational and insane bunch of people that we find ourselves involved with. Okay? The more closely the reality principle models the actual reality around it, the more sane the person becomes. If their reality principle is skewed so much that they are not, able to cope with the actual environment itself, then they become psychotic. Okay, the superego is the result of the Oedipal struggle, which creates the ego ideal, the moral conscience. All right, and the Oedipus complex, as we remember, is the struggle with the sexual attraction to the opposite sex parent and competition with the same sex parent for that opposite sex parent. And this happens because we are sexual creatures, because the avatar is a sexual organism, not because we are. Okay, there's no marriage in heaven. Remember, there's no sex in heaven. But there's sex here, because the avatar is a sexual organism. And because of that, in family structures that are very close, you get this Oedipus complex. And it's in every culture. They have to deal with it. Some of them deal with it differently, okay, than our culture deals with it. And they're about as successful as our culture is, okay, because it's a very complex problem. And it leads to a number of different developmental issues as we get older, and we have to cope with those. Okay, these are the 5 psychosexual developmental phases. These are the classical ones. They've been modified a little bit, but this is still pretty much how it happens. Oral, anal, phallic, latent, and then genital. So from infancy to 18 months, the most stimulating thing that the young infant does is to feed. And so all of its pleasure is coming from, oral feeding. And then after that, it's been weaned. It's no longer being nursed. It's eating solid food, and now its most intense, pleasurable kinds of activity come from excretion. And then finally, about 3 years or so, they begin to recognize that there is pleasure coming from the erogenous zones, from the genitals. Okay? And Freud said it was the phallic phase because this is the point at which boys and girls begin to recognize the difference between boys and girls. Okay? Because there's an obvious anatomical difference that the boys and girls will now see. And this was where we left it last time because we got off on a discussion of penis. Okay? So we won't revisit that. And then finally, puberty through adulthood is the genital phase, where we're now actually sexually operating, mature adults having, intimate sexual relations with our partners. Okay? And so this is the way that it develops. Ideally, everything is done in the right sequence, and ideally everything works good. Now, the ego states are important for us because they're ego states of the ego, of the body, of the avatar, remember. They're not our ego states. We experience the ego states of the avatar. And these are some of the ego states that have been identified. Reality testing is learning to tell the difference between internal and external sources of information. Okay? At the extremes, difference between sense data coming from the real world out there and hallucinations being produced by memories. People who are schizophrenic have hallucinations that interfere with their ability to actually interact with the real world.
Is that the same with bipolar?
Bipolar is a
Manic.
well, is the new term, the DSM-4 term for the old term manic depressive. Okay, we could get off onto this discussion about the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. The new version is coming out in 2013. It'll be DSM-5. DSM-4, the revised version, is currently the one that we're operating under. Bipolar describes a set of symptoms where the person is sort of swinging back and forth between being very, happy and excited and out of control, okay, and being extremely clinically depressed and not happy at all. So there's this sort of, swing back and forth between the two. Okay? Now that, the bipolar person, even though they make errors in their reality testing and may have problems in their interactions with the real world, are still not psychotic. They're not in the realm of schizophrenia. They're not off the edge where they're having hallucinations and not able to actually interact with that world out there because they don't even see it or feel it or hear it or anything else. Okay? So schizophrenia is very, very bad. Schizophrenia means that the avatar itself has lost its total absolute orientation in the external world.
I'm just wondering because my niece was diagnosed as psychotic and
Okay.
and bipolar, but
They actually said she was psychotic?
they said she was psychotic.
Okay, psychosis is a break with reality. So did she have, I mean, that would imply that she had had some major psychotic break with reality and was completely unable to function.
Yeah,
Okay, yes, that, absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
If that happened, if it was that extreme, then that would be a
Like
psychosis.
she's got 3 kids and she doesn't even care, you know, she just does her own thing.
So she's, yeah, see, and so that, if there's a psychotic break with reality, yeah, then that would be, because it goes basically neurosis, which is, you know, you're coping with it, but you're uncomfortable and, you know, making some mistakes, but actually pretty good. Psychosis means there's been a break. Schizophrenia means it's a permanent break.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I don't want to say permanent because
Nothing.
they can be treated. Some of them can be treated, but it is a complete break with reality, and they're off in their own little reality. Okay, so yeah, if it was that bad, then yeah, then it becomes a psychosis. Impulse control is the management of sexual and aggressive impulses without behavioral or symptomatic expression. Okay, examples of failed impulses, failed impulses would be failed impulse control would be road rage, sexual promiscuity, drug and alcohol dependence, binge eating, you know, things like that. Those are examples in our own experience when we lose impulse control, when the id just takes over and we just go with it. Okay? Affect regulation is control of the emotions. See y'all next week. Judgment is the ability to act in a reasonable and responsible manner. All right? Object relations is the ability to create and maintain mutually satisfying relations, okay, with others without excessive pathology. Okay? Excessive pathology. Thought processes are the ability to think abstractly, logically, and coherently. Defensive functioning is the ability to handle conflict in a non-pathological manner. Okay? Conflict, because we're constantly involved in conflict. There's always conflict. We always want to do something and other people don't want to do that something. Or they want us to do something that we don't want to do. So there's always conflict, okay? Synthesis is the ability to organize and unify the disparate elements of the psyche into a coherent unit. Okay? Synthesis fails in schizophrenia, and it also fails in manic depressive psychosis. They're not able to hold it together. Okay, so these are the primary ego functions that the avatar has. If it is normal, if it has not been seriously traumatized or has not been broken. Remember, none of these apply to the thinking substance which we are. We are beyond all of that. But we will experience the avatar's ego states, and that's what's important. So, normal ego state, all ego functions are operating effectively. A regressed ego state is under stress, trauma, or hypnosis, for example. Ego returns to an earlier psychodynamic configuration. Okay? Now this happens a lot. This happens in our everyday lives. Happens a lot of times. Okay? We'll be watching a movie, for example, and it will remind us of something that happened when we were 7. And all of a sudden we re-experience those emotions and everything that happened when we were 7. That is a regression. We're now experiencing an earlier configuration of the ego state. Okay? Fixated means a lack of development due to overwhelming stress or trauma at earlier psychosexual developmental stages. Behavior is fixed and inflexible. So this is one of the features of neuroses and psychosis is this fixated ego state. Okay?
What's an example of that?
Of a fixated ego state?
Yeah.
Probably the one that you women will most understand is the fact that we guys tend to like to play.
There we go.
Okay?
Okay.
I mean, we would much rather be 10 years old and out playing with our friends than doing things you all want us to do. Okay? So that's a fixated state. If they can't, if the male person cannot overcome that, desire to play and do things in the real world for the real people around them, and you know people like this who don't. They don't care. They're going to play, they're going to drink their beer, they're going to watch their football, they're going to do whatever they want. It doesn't matter what you want, what anybody wants. They're just going to play. Okay? So that is a fixation. They are fixated at an earlier stage of development and have never gotten out of it.
That pleasure state.
Yes, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to hold on for dear life to that earlier pleasure state. No responsibility, you know, none of that. They just do what they want. Okay? So that's what's happening there. And it is, in our culture right now, it is chronic. Yeah.
Is it treatable?
It is only treatable if the person is willing to take responsibility and actually recognize what's going on, which is very difficult because this is a state that has been deliberately created. All right? If I wanted to take over a culture and control it, the last thing I want is a bunch of adult males with military training who are capable of combat. What I want is a bunch of fixated adult males who are not combat trained, who are not interested in real world activities, who are not willing to stand up for their women and their families, and who want to go to football games all day. Okay, or play their video games, or drink, or do whatever they want to do. If I wanted to take over a culture, that is the kind of an adult male I would create. And that's exactly what they've done. Okay? And so, yeah, it's treatable, but the person has to recognize that they're being manipulated and that they have responsibilities and they've got to become an adult. And that's hard to do. Yeah. Well, sometimes not. Yeah. Sometimes not. Okay. So yeah. So this is a problem. This is a big problem in our culture today, and in industrialized cultures the world over, because it was deliberately created. Deliberately created fixation. Watch all the comedies. Watch the advertisements. What you will see is variations on a simple theme. The men are dopey, they're dumb, they're stupid, they don't know what the hell they're doing, they're comical, they're childlike. Okay? The women are focused in reality, they're smart, they know what's going on, and they take charge. That's in our dramas, that's in our sitcoms, that's in our advertisements. Just watch it. Just take time out, next time you're just watching TV, just watch this theme play out in various manifestations. That's the way that they want us to behave. Okay? They want all the males to behave as if we're on spring break. Okay? And they want the women to have to cope with that situation by being forced to be in the real world. And, have the jobs and take care of the kids and cook the dinners and drive the kids to soccer practice and do all of these things and be super mom while we're up, playing games. And that's what they've done. That's exactly what they've done. Yeah. Yeah, it's treatable, but it's going to be a hard road because we're not getting any support from the culture. The culture is actually wanting us to do this. So the males are not. I mean, this was not present in 1930. I mean, the generation that went and actually fought World War II, they weren't out playing games. They were out working in the farms when they were 12.
Right. Well, the wars.
Exactly. And so by the time the war came, they were young adults, and I mean, they were serious about this. They knew what they were doing. They didn't have any money. They had to work from the time they were 9 or 8 or 6 or 5 or 3, because they grew up on the farms. 80% of the population was agricultural at that time. They grew up on farms. They had poverty. They didn't have nice things. They didn't have distractions. They couldn't go to a Yankees game. They couldn't turn on the TV and watch 59 football games all at once on the same screen. They didn't have video games. They didn't have computers. They didn't have internet dating. They didn't have internet porn sites. They didn't have any of those things. What they had was hard, bone-breaking, back-breaking, sweat-producing work. Okay? Real men. But after World War II, they decided to begin to shift. And from World War II, from 1945 until the present, you have seen, those of us have seen it. We've actually watched it as the progression has continued to the present day.
Well, the washing machine,
Mm-hmm.
the time saving
Sure,
is.
but why did they do that for you, for the women?
So
They
you
didn't
wouldn't-
do it so you could, you could have time to go out and play.
so you
they
wouldn't
did it-
be bugging.
Yeah, so you
wouldn't
could
be
go,
bugging the males to do
well,
something.
and so you
Go
could
get a
also go
job.
work,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go get a job.
Go get a job. right? So it wasn't because they were kind of benevolent and wanted you all to have a nice life. It was because they wanted you in the workforce so they could, put you to work and tax you. And also so you could be away from your kids. That was one of the primary motives. Okay, because if they take you out of the family, out of the home, the kids are unsupervised except for the schools.
Yeah, children were raised by somebody else.
Yep, absolutely raised by somebody else. And that is very destructive to the family unit. Okay, so, yes, so we are fixing it. Now, religion is an illusion. This is interesting. Freud in 1927 published this book here called The Future of an Illusion. And it's good. I mean, he's right, he's spot on, exactly right. His analysis is exactly accurate. Religious feelings are a product of the Oedipus conflict and reflect the child's desire to avoid punishment at the hands of the larger, stronger, unfathomable adults as the child competes for the affections of its opposite sex parent. Okay? I mean, in all cultures today that are industrialized, how do we refer to God? No, God.
God,
How do we talk about God? He.
the male.
Absolutely, it's a male, it's a father figure. This omnipotent father figure, okay? And that's deliberate. Okay, we've lost contact with all of the old maternal female gods. We have. Now the ancients didn't. When you were back in the ancient mystery religions and you were a Gnostic even later on, and you were a Greek philosopher, you would take those female god images and you would adopt them. So that you could experience, imaginatively that aspect of reality. Now we don't. There's no female gods anywhere in our pantheon. Okay? So in an institutional setting, this desire then becomes a universal obsessive-compulsive disorder, with regular attendance, catechism, ritual, psychodrama, etc., as the OCD behaviors which allow the person to avoid overwhelming feelings of anxiety, depression, guilt, and shame. Okay? So this is Freud's analysis of organized religion in the early part of the 20th century. Okay?
Freud a Catholic?
What's that?
No, he was a Jew.
He was a Jew. He was
I
Jewish.
said was Freud a Catholic because I can see the
Yeah.
Catholic thing.
Yes, he was Jewish, but he was an atheist, remember. He abandoned all of this very young, very early. But yeah, this is a good description of institutionalized kinds of religions that do not get to the core of the matter, which is training us to separate from the avatar. That's the core of everything. Any religion that does that, that actually provides us with instruction on how to do that, would be a real religion. Whereas those which are only interested in control would be this model here. Yeah.
Would you define OCD?
Obsessive compulsive disorder is a repetitive manifestation of behaviors they're sort of ritualistic behaviors in order to fend off feelings of anxiety, depression, shame, and guilt. Okay? So, for example, classically you find in Shakespeare's Macbeth. Okay? Remember Lady Macbeth? What does she do after she has committed the murder? Washes her hands again and again and again and again. She feels guilty, she feels ashamed because she's murdered this person, and even though there's no physical blood on her hands anymore, she continuously washes her hands until she goes crazy. Okay, so this is Shakespeare's dramatic representation of an obsessive-compulsive disorder. If you have someone that that has to have everything exactly in its place or they get crazy, okay, that's OCD. If you have someone that that has to do things in exactly the same sequence, that's OCD. And if you interrupt that sequence or put things out of order, they literally flip out. They lose it because now these feelings of guilt, shame, anxiety, and depression are no longer being held magically at bay by the ritual. And so they feel those things. So at its extremes, it can lead to a psychotic break. is you cannot ritualize, you cannot use ritual to defend against all of the attacks against you. Okay, this place is messy. This place is dangerous, this place is illogical, this place is insane. And if you're trying to just, maintain total and absolute control over this small part of the environment in order to fend off the reality that is there, you're going to fail sooner or later, and that can lead to a psychotic break. Yeah.
Is there a difference between OCD and OCD personality?
The concept of personality is,
Because my daughter,
uh-huh.
we thought had OCD, and
Right.
then she went to psychologist,
Mhm.
and he said that she had just had OCD personality.
Uh-huh. So in other words, he didn't want to treat her? Or,
Well, I think what he was saying was, you're not as bad as they think you are. You're
Oh,
just-
okay.
Your personalities, you have that personality, but you really don't have OCD.
oh,
Does
okay.
that make sense?
Well, yeah, these are, keep in mind that there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes in that particular diagnosis. The concept of personality is that we have a fixed way of behaving, and that is our personality.
Okay.
Okay? That has failed every test. That has failed every single test that we've tried to use to sort of come up with personality traits that are consistent even in the same person, let alone among the larger population. Not that it's not a useful concept. It is. It's useful, but it's not concrete enough to actually have meaning in the real world. Okay? Because you can have somebody who seems to have a personality and seems to behave this way most of the time, who will all of a sudden do something completely different. Okay? So personality is not a definer of behaviors, in other words. So it's a concept that is useful in non-technical, non-stringent kinds of discussions. What he was trying to say was, your daughter doesn't need medication.
Okay.
She just seems to have a tendency to behave this way, that it's not really psychotic or neurotic, which is a good way of putting it.
Okay.
Okay? So he was just trying to do that.
Does that mean like, because I have like a certain ritual in the morning. I have to brush my teeth in the morning or at night. And I have this certain ritual that I go through, and if I don't do it, I just don't feel right.
Yeah.
But I don't go crazy over it.
No.
If I fail to brush my teeth, I just don't like it, but it's just I can live without it.
Right. Part of that is just simple efficiency, because there seems to be a proper way, an efficient way of doing things in a proper sequence. And so when that sequence is violated, you get that feeling that it's incomplete. Okay? But it's not OCD.
It's not so,
Yeah.
okay. But we do have kind of inside of us the ritual.
Well, and we're definitely, the thing about this place that makes it manageable at all is that it's rule governed. There are rules that govern this place. There are patterns. And so what we attempt to do is to set up recurring patterns that will help us, cope with everything that we have to cope with. Habits. And we want those habits to be as efficient and as constructive as we can make them. Okay? Now the OCD is different because it is intending to try to take control of everything. It's essentially what they're thinking in the back of their minds is, I'm going to exert my will and control everything here so that I won't feel bad and so that people won't hurt me. Okay? And if it gets to a very dangerous level, psychotic level, it will interfere with their ability to interact with other people and with the environment at large. Because they simply won't be able to. Because, like I said, the world is dangerous. It just is. And, this organism is going to get sick. It's going to, have illnesses. It's going to have accidents. It's going to perish. So all of these things, that's what they're attempting to compensate for. They're attempting to take total control over it and make it safe, basically, which is, of course, an impossible task, and ultimately will fail.
And by the personality, it means that they just have certain ways of doing things?
Well, by personality, yeah, I don't know exactly what he was trying to say, because like I said, the concept of personality is really fluid. Personality tests, for example, you know, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory is probably the largest and most tested one, the most valid one that we have out there. And so, in response to the 689 questions or however many there are, we can come up with a pretty good idea of how you're going to respond to most situations. And we call that personality. And then we put it on a graph and we say, these are strong personality traits, these are weak personality traits. Okay? But even given the statistical validation of the instrument being in use for 80 years now, in one form or another, the individual can still violate that and do something totally different, totally out of the blue. Okay? So again, we're trying to impose statistical norms on chaotic behaviors. Okay, so in other words, I think all he was trying to say was, she doesn't need treatment, she doesn't need medication, she doesn't need any of those things. It is just the way that she seems to be happy doing things. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah. Even though it may appear from the outside to be OCD related, it's really not. It's just her preferred way of doing things. Okay? Yeah, and remember, it's very difficult to, these are high level, very difficult abstract concepts. So don't get hung up on the terminology. Okay, just try to, because it has a long history, as you can see. Okay, now we'll finish with this real quick. The oceanic feeling of mysticism. Romain Rolland, the person we just saw up there, in a letter to Freud, talked about this oceanic feeling. Okay, and he said this is the basis of all religious feeling. This is the basis of all mysticism. This is the basis of all meditation and everything else. Freud said that this oceanic feeling would be the result of the primary narcissism produced by the early experiences emerging with the mother during nursing and may trace its origins to experiences of undifferentiation in the womb. So in other words, this oceanic feeling that we get when we meditate and everything else is simply a state of feeling that takes us back to that nice, comfortable, calm, quiet, liquid place of the womb, and doesn't have any relationship to an extra mundane reality. Okay, so this is Freud's interpretation of it. Now, in the variety of religious experiences, James, describes these various experiences again and again and again in different epochs and different cultures at different times. Okay, not necessarily disagreeing with Freud, just saying that it's a universal feeling. Okay, so we'll pick up here the next seminar next week, and then we'll get into the behavioral interpretations. We'll talk about Pavlov and Skinner and their behavioral models of how the avatar behaves, and then we'll take a look at Gurdjieff and Peter Uspensky, who are Sufi mystics. They're Islamic mystics coming out of Russia. Okay, in the latter part of the 1800s, early part of the 1900s, and we'll see that they're talking exactly the same way as we are, as everybody else is.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually we're leaving the avatar thinking into now the mystic thinking.
No.
into the self.
No, yeah, the avatar refers to this organism here.
So the mystic is still,
No, the mysticism refers to, mystical methods are intended to teach us, to train us to affect the dissociation, the detachment of the spirit, the mind, the soul, the thinking substance which we are from the avatar.
so we're pulling away from Freud?
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely, yeah. I just wanted, Freud's descriptions are extremely accurate, but they only apply to the avatar, okay, in its cultural setting. All right? They do not apply, none of what he says applies to the thinking substance which we are. We, of course, will experience all of the things that the avatar does, including the developmental cycles and the learning and the neuroses and the OCD behaviors and all this other stuff. We will experience it, obviously, but it's not us. It's not an essential feature of our being. It is an essential feature of the avatar. And it is our objective to learn from that and to overcome it and to master the avatar. Yeah,
When is that class discussion going to take place?
we can do that next week. Okay, or we can stay. I mean, there's no one else coming into the classroom. It's up to you guys. Next week? Okay, so we'll have this this discussion next week. First thing when we come in. Okay? All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Well, you know, my brother-in-law is this niece is kind of obsessive compulsive. Probably, yes.
Or environment?
It could have been, and she was
That's
anorexic.
interesting. We
Oh my
get,
God, my
we get
sister is
different
going
versions
through
of
real, and then there's 3 kids.
in classical Buddhism,
But you know what? I just listened to my sister, and she is dealing with it. She's going to counseling herself,
And that's the only person we can help.
yep,
We can't point it always.
right, she said. And then she pays attention to those grandkids, and in the meantime, detaches from her daughter.
So you have to.
Boy,
that's tough, isn't it?
And then when we hear about this, there are modern versions of this, for example, we could follow Jane Roberts and her second book.
Good to see you.
Jane Roberts was a reporter. She was actually
We've come from full circle, haven't we?
Oh, yeah.
Spiritualism and things like that. Yeah, and so what she did was she went out on a Ouija board and she began to play with it, and after, I can't remember exactly. Well, just to try to describe it in your talk.
Yes.
Here, here's what I've been doing, here's the experiences I have.
Well, it certainly made my mind work
Yeah,
better than it has in
but-
a long time.
I think she played, I'm gonna try to, I'm gonna say 3 years, but don't hold me to that. She all of a sudden made contact with this energy entity, which is how it described itself, named Seth. And she then began acting as a trance medium, and this entity, would literally take over her body and speak to her. You can actually go out and see video of her and watch her like before and after, and it's completely different. I mean, if there is reality here, I mean, this would be an example of it. And Seth talks about in a couple of places in the books, he talks about having multiple incarnations at the same time. He's now hanging out in Jane Roberts' body for the moment, and smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and having this discussion, but he's also simultaneously at the same time having the experiences of this dog, like in New Jersey. Okay, so he talks about that as if it were possible. Again, we're sort of like, we have the anecdotal evidence, we have accounts from across the historical process here of different kinds of things, reincarnating, having experiences. Theoretically, of course, if our model is correct, thinking substance here that can interact with any kind of a nervous system, yeah, definitely that would be possible, yeah. I don't know that we could be reincarnated as a paramecium, because they don't have a nervous system like this. They don't have a mammalian nervous system. So if Dr. Eccles is right, then it would have to be some kind of mammalian creature that has a cerebral cortex that we can then interact with to have that experience. Anything without that, like a reptile, we couldn't, because it doesn't have a cerebral cortex. So nothing other than mammalian life forms would it be possible for us to actually interact with and have any kind, and even be able to do it, because the nervous system structures of reptiles wouldn't permit that. It just doesn't have the structure that would permit that. It doesn't even have the microstructures, which is where he's saying, down at the quantum level, where he's saying that all this happens. They do not have that. They do not have a cortex, a neocortex.
So,
Yeah.
there is something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
People said, oh, it's not
No, yeah. And it's like, it's theory. Obviously, the model would permit that.
Right.
We have all of these anecdotal data coming to us from across the centuries where they talk about this.
So I just have to get the data and show them.
Yeah, I would just go, you can find, like I said, the anecdotes and everything else are out there. The models, the classical Buddhist model is to divide the universe into 6 different sort of dimensions. And at the lower end, we have like the hell beings. And they're locked into this eternal suffering state. You know, there's the ice hells and the inferno hells and the hells of...
And that's all in one state.
And that is the lowest state possible for a human consciousness, for a consciousness. And then the next level we would have would be the hungry ghosts. And then the next level would be the animals. Okay? The mammals, basically. And then the next level would be us. Okay? Human beings involved in the struggle, a moral struggle, with the human body and the human intelligence and a human understanding. And then we would have the demigods, and then we would have the gods. And the Buddha says, if you're in hell, you're too tormented to even think about progress. If you're a hungry ghost, you're not thinking about progress. If you're an animal, you're locked into instinctive patterns of behavior and can't think about progress. If you're a demigod or a god, you're having way too much fun to even think about this. And besides, since you're literally immortal, none of these things matter to you at the time. Only human beings with their specific set of contingencies here, where we are involved with a highly complex mammalian, primate kind of form like this in the extended universe. Only we have any chance to actually evolve. No one else can. And so that's why they constantly remind us, you've got to start this now. Don't put it off to a future life, because you have no idea what that future life is going to be. And if you're not reincarnated as a human being, you're in trouble.
Then you might not have
Exactly. It might be eons before you have a chance again, right?
Okay.
So that's what they're talking about there. So, yeah, so the concept of reincarnation is very ancient, way old.
Right.
Yeah, and as far as reincarnating as other creatures, it's out there in the literature. The model would permit it.
But most likely not.
Yeah, most likely not. I mean, you would have to have the energy creature Seth is saying, I have done this so many times that I can actually do it without losing myself. I can interface with Jane Roberts right now. I can maintain my own separate existence here. I can incarnate as this puppy dog over here and have that experiences all at the same time, because I've practiced a lot and I know how to do that and not get lost.
Right. My life, I get lost.
Right, we don't fragment ourselves and all get lost out there. So.
Is that a book? Is it the book you're talking about? Or
It's a series of books, yeah, series of books by Jane Roberts, from the early 1960s until, I think she died in like 87 or 88. Yeah, Jane Roberts, it's called, the first book was called The Coming of Seth. And then the second book,
the reincarnation?
yeah, was about this entity that she encountered when she did her Ouija board studies. And then she became a trance medium for this energy entity. And the books are the result of that. Her husband, Robert Butts, was actually transcribing everything. And then they had video later, of course, and audio early. So they've got all the audio tapes, the videotapes, and his transcriptions, and the transcriptions of the sessions became the books. And then she branched off and she did a number of fictional works. For example, there's one where she channeled Paul Cézanne, the artist. And there's one where she channeled William James.
Oh, really?
Okay, and then she has a couple of novels about this highly evolved entity called Oversoul 7, where they're just sort of novels about the adventures of Oversoul 7. So
What's the difference in that and the dual personality people?
the people who have multiple personality, they have been traumatized into having those multiple personalities. And that is a feature of the avatar, not of the consciousness which is there. Hi there, do you need the computer?
I have a class at 1 o'clock.
Yes, do you need this computer?
No, I don't,
okay.
thank you.
Yeah, so I will...
You look like you have a crown on, Betty.
Oh, do I? Well,
Oh,
So did you have another question?
no, I was just
we're gonna chat with him about.
Oh, okay.
Can we chat more about this fixation type thing?
Yeah, hold on just a second, Betty. It'll take me about 5 minutes here to just disconnect everything.
No, I want you to finish your talk first.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well,
And
I
I'll-
have 3 more things, so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let me just chat with you sometime, we'll go for coffee.
Okay, yeah,
Okay,
just give me a
fine.
call, Betty.
I've
Whenever.
got some more information and some
Oh.
interesting stuff.
Good.
Amazingly, Ohio has done a wonderful law back there dealing with some of their felons.
Awesome.
Just amazing. So I'll bring that stuff to you.
Good.
Okay?
Oh, I have an expense one.
And another thing.
How are you?
Just
Another
great.
question, well, I just think you said that, now, I don't know if I heard this or you said this,
There. Okay.
Anyway. You know that there's, do you believe that spirits are out there and that's how babies come? That there's spirits, I don't believe in that religion, so I don't know.
Well, consciousness itself, okay, would, according to Eccles' model, would interact with the developing child. Okay.
Yeah, I missed last week.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, and so
You
that,
probably spoke to that.
yeah, and so that, yeah, the current model, the Eccles model, that we're using, Dr. John C. Eccles, who's a Nobel Prize winner for, he won the Nobel Prize in '63 for his work on the neurochemical transmission of, nervous system impulses across the synaptic gap. So he's created this quantum level model of how the two substances interact with each other. Okay.
So maybe that is true then.
Yeah, well, I would, yeah. I mean, the Gnostic mythology, the Gnostic cosmology indicates that the consciousnesses that we are, have been snatched out of their home in heaven and literally encased here and imprisoned and thrown down to this material existence. So, there's a question, if we start to look at modern philosophy from Hegel onward, we'll begin to see that they're now looking at, they're now describing things as if consciousness itself is the result of the interaction between what we would traditionally call spirit and traditionally call matter. Consciousness arrives at the interface between those two events, between those two entities. Okay, and so consciousness needs to have an object, and consciousness is a necessary result of the interaction. So when one or other of the elements is missing, consciousness is gone.
Sure.
Okay, so in other words, there would be no need for an entity out here that then comes in and takes over. It would just be the natural arising out of the, okay, now, yeah.
Now, and then the last question I have, my son-in-law believes that there's some entity out there,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know what it's called, and that's the religion he believes in.
Okay.
There's some energy out there, but I don't understand it,
Okay, I'm not sure either.
and I'm not sure what it's called. Do you practice here in county, or
Oh, yeah.
do you have an office, or?
Oh, no, I don't have an office, yeah. It's all internet-based.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's
So,
all internet.
yeah,
So,
when, he'll be back probably in February, so
Oh,
I'll ask
good.
you more about.
ask me more about it. Yeah, and then what you can do is just go out to the website and just send me an email. On the front page is a little contact form, and just
Oh, no.
email, and then that'll email it to me, and then I'll get back with you.
Right, because I don't really understand
Yeah.
what he's told
I,
me.
exactly, and I'm not sure what
And
it's.
so maybe that you're so knowledgeable, you might understand it.
Yeah, we'll
Explain
be
it
able
more
to
in
find
depth.
out what he's talking about, yeah.
Right.
Once we have a little bit more
What is
information.
the classes you're teaching?
This one here is meditation.
It's very
Oh.
good. It's very good. Thank you very much.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it.
See you next week.
Oh, that's your bed.
Okay. Let me, let's see, let me finish tearing things down, and then I'll help you put the chairs back.
I think some light would be helpful.
Yep.